Welcome to the realm of science fiction, where imagination knows no bounds and extraordinary stories unfold. Enjoy the adventure. Nivora's atmosphere shimmered under the light of its 3 moons, each casting a different hue on the alien landscape below. The glow of sapphire, amber, and jade merged across the sky in a dance of surreal colors, as if the world itself was caught in an endless cosmic waltz. A faint hum resonated through the air, a magnetic pull that seemed to sink into the bones of those who stepped onto the surface. The ground was covered with translucent, bioluminescent flora, their shapes twisting and curling like sentient beings, responding to every step taken upon them. Every movement here felt alive, connected to an ancient force that neither humankind nor the Eliari could fully explain. The very soil seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the planet, and the sky above, split into 3 phases of lunar cycles, was a silent testament to the untold secrets of Nivora. The Eliari stood at the edge of their settlement, their forms, elegant and ethereal in the moonlight. Unlike humans, they did not rush. Their movements were deliberate, measured, as though each breath they took was a prayer to the moons themselves. In their eyes lay centuries of wisdom, their gaze quiet, but intense, as though they had seen the universe through a lens far older than any human could imagine. Their spiritual traditions were ancient, tied directly to the cyclical rhythms of the moons above, shaping their culture, their language, and their way of life. In the distance, the first lunar eclipse of the season was about to begin, signaling the start of a momentous ritual, one that would change the course of their history and forever entwine their fate with the humans who had arrived. Dr. Elise Harper had spent her life studying the unknown, unraveling the mysteries of alien cultures with the precision of a master linguist. Xenolinguistics was her field, and she had become one of Earth's foremost experts, translating the forgotten languages of distant worlds. But it wasn't just the ancient scripts that intrigued her, it was the stories hidden within them. The legends of the Eliari, a race as old as the stars themselves, spoke of cycles of harmony between species, of connections that transcended the physical realm. Elise was captivated by these myths, believing that there was something profound in them, yet deep within, Elise wrestled with a nagging discomfort. Earth's history was riddled with conquest and the erasure of cultures, and as much as she admired the Eliari, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was a part of something that might repeat the mistakes of her ancestors. Was she a scholar, seeking truth, or was she another pawn in humanity's long history of colonization? Commander Rafe Logan stood at the helm of humanity's mission with the cold efficiency of someone who had seen too much. A man of science, hardened by decades of military command, he trusted only what he could measure, calculate, and control. The Eliari, with their ethereal ways and mystic traditions, were a puzzle. One he was determined to crack, but never to understand fully. To him, their rituals were nothing more than superstition, distractions in the pursuit of concrete knowledge. Yet, deep inside, a small voice whispered, could these myths be the very key to surviving the unknown? The first encounter with Terrellin was nothing short of mesmerizing. His presence, a quiet force, seemed to transcend language. Unlike any human diplomat, Terrellin did not rely on words to communicate. His gestures were deliberate, his movements fluid, as if guided by the very rhythm of the stars themselves. To an outsider, he might have seemed aloof or detached, but there was an undeniable depth to the way he carried himself. Every motion, every flick of his hand felt laden with meaning, symbols of a culture far older and more complex than anything Elise had encountered in her studies. Yet there was something else, something more personal in his eyes. An unspoken connection that flickered between them, an inexplicable pull. Elise couldn't understand it, nor could she shake the feeling that Terrellin was watching her, not just as a scholar, but as something deeper. Was it fascination, or something more? Terrellin, the enigmatic envoy, embodied his people's deepest secrets, and Elise found herself drawn into a web she could not yet comprehend. The air on Nivora grew thick with anticipation as the red moon, long a harbinger of change, began its slow ascent toward the heavens. The locals, with their deep spiritual ties to the lunar cycles, whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on the celestial event. The rare convergence of Nivora's moons was not just a spectacle. It was a sacred ritual known as the Soul Convergence. This ancient event had been revered for millennia, a moment when the 3 moons aligned in perfect harmony, casting the world below into an eerie crimson glow. For the Eliari, it symbolized the merging of physical and spiritual realms. an event of such profound importance that it was believed to bring both revelation and peril. As the moons drew nearer to their destined positions, a sense of dread mingled. With reverence among the people, something was coming. The question was, what would it bring? Elise stood on the precipice of a culture she thought she understood, but the deeper she delved into the mysteries of the Eliari, the more their traditions twisted like shadows in a fog. Eager to honor their ways, she agreed to participate in the sacred diplomatic ritual. The air was thick with the reverence of the Eliari, and their subtle gestures filled her with unease. Her guide, Terrellin, spoke little, his eyes glimmering, with an emotion Elise couldn't place. "Beware the moon's power," he had said, the warning hanging in the air like a forgotten prayer. Elise, however, dismissed it. She had always been skeptical of anything less tangible than science. She thought the warning was merely symbolic, a metaphor for the gravitas of the ceremony. But as the ritual unfolded, she began to feel a strange pull, an undercurrent of something ancient, something far more real than she had ever anticipated. Was this truly a metaphor, or something else entirely? Under the twin glow of the aligned moons, a strange energy filled the air, something that could not be named, but was deeply felt by all who stood witness. Elise, driven by an impulse she couldn't explain, took a step forward, her breath shallow with anticipation. Without thinking, she kissed Terrellin. The moment her lips touched his, everything stopped. The murmurs of the crowd fell silent, and the very fabric of the air seemed to quiver. It was as though reality itself had blinked, resetting, recalibrating. A ripple passed through her, a whisper of something vast and ancient. Time fractured. Under the fiery blaze of the red moon, Elise felt it, the delicate yet overwhelming shift in the very fabric of existence. Her heart raced, thudding in her chest, as the cosmic forces converged. As her lips met Terrellin's, the world around her seemed to slow, each moment stretching, distorting, becoming something unrecognizable. A surge of memories, alien, ancient, and far beyond human comprehension, ripped through her mind. They weren't hers. She could feel the weight of them, the sensations of another life lived, another soul's journey. It was as though she was falling through the layers of time and space, through the very essence of someone who wasn't human. The feeling was alien, terrifying and awe-inspiring at once. The thoughts were not her own, yet they gripped her, urging her to see the universe in a way that humanity never could. Her fingers trembled as the kiss deepened. She could feel the alien consciousness, a bond forming between her and Terrellin that defied comprehension. Yet in the back of her mind, a voice echoed, distant and sharp. Was this bond a gift or a curse? Reality snapped back, but something had changed within her. Time, now restored, felt different. Elise wasn't the same. The kiss had altered her, and with it, her understanding of the universe itself. She wasn't sure if she had unlocked something far greater, or stumbled into a perilous truth, one that might not let her return to the life she once knew. Elise stumbled backward, her breath caught in her throat, the ground beneath her seeming to ripple like water. Her mind was a battlefield of images, fragmented memories that were not hers. Faces, names, places, alien whispers filled her thoughts, sharp and vivid, as though 1,000 lives had just been crammed into her consciousness. She gasped, clutching her head, trying to make sense of the dissonance flooding her senses. Her heart raced with an alien urgency, her own memories now drowned beneath the weight of something far greater. Terrellin, too, was affected. His body trembled violently as he fell to his knees, his hand clutching his chest. His face contorted with a mix of pain and disbelief, eyes wide as if he too could feel the echoes of what had just passed between them. A shockwave rippled through the gathered Eliari, a collective gasp of awe and fear rising from the crowd. This wasn't just any ordinary gesture, this was something far more profound. The bond was not what Elise had expected. It was not simply a gesture of peace. It was a channel, a floodgate to a power she was not prepared for. The realization hit her hard. Something ancient, something dangerous, had been unleashed. The air was thick with tension, vibrating with the power of an ancient force now awakened. The Eliari Council, standing in solemn unity, raised their voices in unison, declaring the moment that had just passed as irreversible, sacred. The rite of eternal accord, once thought to be a myth, had been triggered. The bond, now established, between Elise and Terrellin, was more than a simple gesture of peace. It was a covenant, a promise that transcended time and space. Around them, the crowd fell to their knees in reverence. Their faces were etched with awe, their gazes locked in a mixture of fear and adoration. They understood the gravity of what had just occurred. This was no ordinary moment. This was the beginning of something profound, something that could not be undone. The rite was a sacred oath, binding Elise and Tyrellin in a way that no one, no being, could ever hope to break. Elise stood frozen, her mind a whirl of confusion and fear. What had she done? She had merely hoped to bridge the gap to foster understanding, but this was something else entirely. She had no understanding of the power she had just unleashed, the responsibilities now thrust upon her. She wanted to speak, to protest, to ask questions, but the weight of the moment crushed her voice. A single, terrifying thought crept into her mind. Had she just bound herself to something far beyond her comprehension? Elise's heart raced as the words spilled from her lips, frantic and desperate. It was just symbolic, a gesture of peace, nothing more. Her voice wavered under the weight of the crowd's intense gaze. She tried to make them understand, tried to explain that the kiss was a simple act of cultural mimicry, an attempt to show respect, not an irreversible bond. But the reaction from the Eliari was not what she expected. Their expressions shifted, from awe to disbelief, then to something darker. There were murmurs, low and urgent, as if they had just witnessed a great betrayal. Their eyes were full of judgment, and Elise felt as if she were being pierced by their collective stare. The council, too, was silent, their faces unreadable, yet their posture, rigid, almost immobile, spoke volumes. The moons, the celestial witnesses, hung heavy in the sky, their glow casting an eerie light over the scene. It was done. The bond had been sealed, and in the eyes of the Eliari, there was no turning back. To them, Elise's words weren't an explanation. They were an insult, a blasphemy. The ritual could not be undone. The rite had been witnessed by the sacred moons. The consequences were now set in stone. In the days that followed, Tyrellin found himself slipping into dreams unlike any he had ever known. The familiar landscapes of his people, vast, quiet forests and shimmering cities, began to blur into images that were alien, unsettling. He saw towering buildings that scraped the sky, their windows filled with the cold, lifeless glow of artificial lights. The hum of machines drowned out the natural sounds of life, replaced by the constant rumble of engines and distant cries of conflict. He dreamt of rain, too, endless torrents like the sky itself weeping for the chaos that had consumed the world below. Tyrellin woke from these visions, his heart racing, his skin slick with sweat. His hands trembled, the sensation of terror, lingering long after the dream had faded. He wiped away tears he could not understand. Hearth, this place he had never known, was embedding itself in his mind, in his soul like a disease. The link, the bond forged in that kiss, was growing stronger, and with it, the alien memories were changing him. The very essence of his being was being reshaped by something far beyond his control. What was this strange pull, and why did it feel like Earth's nightmares were becoming his own? Each night, as darkness settled over the unknown world, Elise found herself drifting into a restless sleep. But it wasn't just the silence that haunted her, it was the presence that lingered just beyond her reach. His presence. Tyrellin's pulse, his emotions, became indistinguishable from her own. At first, it was just faint echoes, a sense of grief too deep for words, a rush of longing that twisted in her chest like a physical pain. But it grew stronger. Every night it became harder to separate her thoughts from his. His memories of childhood, of forests unlike any she had ever seen, filled her mind with vivid images she couldn't ignore. She felt his devotion, his unspoken promises, woven into the very fabric of her own being. The sensations were not her own, yet they felt like they were embedded in her bones. She reached out, instinctively responding to feelings she couldn't control. Their nervous systems, once separate, seemed to be entwining, creating an unbreakable bond between them. The truth settled in. What had begun as an alien connection was becoming something far more intimate, something terrifying. At the edge of the research outpost, reality itself began to tremble. It started as a subtle hum, a vibration in the air that only the most sensitive instruments could detect. But soon, the hum turned into a shudder, then a violent tremor that reverberated through the ground beneath their feet. The scientists, once confident in their ability to measure and predict, stood in stunned silence as their instruments flickered and failed, unable to capture the truth of what was happening. The first signs of distortion were small, a misplaced reading here, an impossible angle there, but they multiplied quickly, swelling like an unstoppable wave. Time itself seemed to ripple. The minutes stretched and bent, as though they had been unraveled, twisted into something unrecognizable. Seconds held on longer than they should, then rushed by in fleeting moments. Elise could feel it, though she couldn't name it. The bond with Tyrellen was no longer just a mental connection. It was warping the very space around them, tearing at the edges of reality. The scientists theorized, their voices strained, with uncertainty, that the bond had created a localized entanglement, perhaps even disrupting Nevora's quantum fabric. The terror of the unknown loomed heavy. Could the bond be causing this? Was it possible that the forces at play were beyond their understanding, or worse, beyond their control? The air crackled with the threat of something far greater than they had ever imagined. And yet, even as fear gripped them, they knew this was only the beginning. Something larger, something darker was on the horizon. Commander Logan's face was a mask of grim determination as he stood in the dimly lit command room. His fingers drummed against the control panel, each tap a slow, deliberate echo of his mounting frustration. Elise, the last person he ever expected to be at the center of this, was now his greatest uncertainty. He had watched the reports pour in, strange anomalies, unstable readings, and a bond unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. To him, it wasn't just a connection between two individuals. It was a weapon, a potential viral infection that he could contaminate their minds, their very biology, if left unchecked. His decision came without hesitation. He had no room for doubt in this situation. Elise was to be quarantined immediately. There was no alternative, no compromise. He would have her forcibly extracted if necessary, and the risks to Earth, his home, were too high to ignore. The tests awaited back on Earth, where they would finally answer the questions that had begun to consume him. A voice, almost drowned in the tension of the room, whispered within his mind, "Can they ever truly contain it?" The Council's words struck with the force of a meteor impact. There was no ambiguity in their decree. Elise's fate had been sealed, not by her choice, but by the ancient and unyielding customs of the Eliari. She was to complete the bond, a ritual bound by forces beyond comprehension. To break it was an impossibility, a death sentence not just for Tyrellen but for her as well. The air seemed to thicken around her, pressing in with suffocating finality. In the face of this verdict, there was only one truth. They would either die together or remain bound, forever altered. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily upon Elise's chest. Her own people had turned their backs on her, their intentions now as clear as the stars above: return home, face a slow death, and become a tool in their ever-expanding experiments. Yet, Tyrellen stood beside her, unwavering, his faith in her stronger than any chain Earth could forge. Before her lay a choice: to obey, to submit, and to wither in a cage of her own making, or to step into the unknown, embracing the mysterious link that bound her to Tyrellen, and all the terrifying possibilities it could unlock. The first hint of something strange emerged quietly, like a whisper in the dark. Elise could no longer tell where her thoughts ended and Tyrellen's began. It started with fleeting moments, unfamiliar images flickering through her mind, memories that weren't hers, but felt as vivid as her own. A flash of childhood laughter in an alien forest, the sharp sting of a loss she hadn't experienced. She could feel Tyrellen's emotions rise and fall within her, each pulse of grief, of joy, resonating deep within her chest. It was no longer a question of whether they were connected, it was how far it would go. At first she fought it. She clung to her individuality, afraid of losing herself in the vastness of Tyrellen's presence. But each passing day, the line between them blurred a little more. Their voices began to overlap in their shared thoughts, like the hum of an old machine in perfect synchrony. She'd wake from dreams not entirely her own, feeling the weight of Tyrellen's memories, his sorrows, and his strange, unspoken devotion. The world around her seemed to flicker, as if reality itself was adjusting to this new reality. 2. Minds intertwined, one feeding the other. The more they shared, the more they became something new, something neither fully human nor fully alien. Their individuality, once so sharply defined, dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Every day the separation between their souls weakened until they could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Something new was emerging. Something neither could control but both were bound to. The dreams began as an oddity, a brief flicker at the edge of sleep. At first, the human team dismissed it, nothing more than the stress of the mission. But as the nights wore on, the dreams became more vivid, more terrifying. Dying stars, their fiery death throes casting a grotesque red hue across alien skies. Screams, inhuman, gut-wrenching cries that echoed through the blackness of space, reverberating in their bones. Each nightmare felt more real than the waking world, as though the stars themselves were warning them. The sense of a deep, ancient terror, one that reached beyond the universe and into the core of existence, began to grow. As the dreams continued, the line between what was real and what was imagined began to blur. Some of the crew tried to brush it off, chalking it up to stress or fatigue. But the nightmares were too consistent, too specific. They spoke of an unknowable horror, a cosmic force far beyond their understanding. Soon those affected began to question the nature of their own reality. Was this truly their mind at play, or was something much darker intruding on their thoughts? What unsettled them most, though, was how it spread, infecting those who spent the most time near the bond, the shared connection between Elise and Tyrellin. The closer they came, the more they could feel the shadows creeping into their minds, the horror slipping between their waking and sleeping worlds. It was as if the very fabric of their consciousness was becoming unknitted, unraveling with each passing night. The Eliaris' belief in fate was woven deep into the fabric of their culture, a relentless tide that surged through their people for millennia. They had long believed in the myth of unity, a prophecy that spoke of two souls destined to merge, creating a living bridge between their kind and the vast expanse of the cosmos. To the Eliari, this wasn't a mere legend. It was their birthright, their hope for salvation. It was the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe itself. When Elise and Tyrellin's bond began to form, the Eliari saw it as the fulfillment of their ancient prophecy. They celebrated the union as though it were the very breath of life, hailing it as the moment their species had waited for. Their joy was contagious, sweeping through their civilization with an intensity that left the human crew shaken. They spoke in reverent tones, convinced that this was no mere coincidence, that the union of these two souls was the answer to their deepest yearning, the event that would reconnect them with a cosmic force far beyond their comprehension. But for those who looked closer, doubt lingered. Was this truly destiny unfolding, or had they deluded themselves into believing in something that simply wasn't meant to be? For Elise and Tyrellin, this question hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Elise had always prided herself on her unwavering logic. A scientist through and through, she had built her career on reason, evidence, and the cold precision of facts. Yet now, as her mind unraveled in the face of an overwhelming tide of visions, logic seemed like a flimsy weapon against an invisible storm. It began innocuously, a fleeting image of a starship, alien and ancient, slipping through the edges of her vision. The images grew sharper with time. Fleets of ships, vast battles raging against an ethereal backdrop, figures cloaked in shadow standing at the forefront of wars she had never studied. As her connection with Tyrellin deepened, so too did the intensity of these haunting visions. But there was something more. A voice, not of her own thoughts, but of something ancient, something cosmic, seemed to whisper her name in the void. Every instinct screamed at her to dismiss it, to chalk it up to stress, to mental overload, to the power of suggestion. But the visions refused to fade. They invaded her dreams, pierced her waking moments, and shook her core beliefs to the ground. Science, the one thing that had always anchored her, faltered before this unexplainable force. Her logical mind screamed for understanding, but the more she sought answers, the further she seemed from any coherent explanation. The very fabric of her reality seemed to tear at the edges, and Elise was left questioning whether she was truly losing her grip, or if the universe had simply expanded too far beyond human comprehension. The visions hit Elise with the intensity of a storm, sweeping her away to a place she couldn't comprehend but somehow knew. Her senses dissolved, and in their place, a flood of images rushed into her mind. A galaxy, vast and vibrant, unfolded before her, stretching across the cosmos like a tapestry of golden brilliance. She watched as the Eliari, once masters of the stars, thrived in their majestic cities, their technology transcending anything humanity could imagine. But then the images shifted. A tragedy began to unravel. A civilization brought to its knees, consumed by war and hubris. The Eliari's golden age slipped into shadow, and with it their legacy faded. Yet, in the depths of her trance, Elise felt it, their history, their knowledge, encoded in the very fabric of the bond she shared with Tyrellin. It pulsed within her veins like a cosmic archive waiting to be unlocked. She wasn't merely Elise anymore. She carried an entire universe inside her. Commander Logan stood at the apex of the situation, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like an insurmountable force. Elise had become more than just a participant in the experiment. She had become a variable that could unravel everything. In his eyes, the bond between her and Tyrellin was no longer a potential for evolution. It was a weapon, a threat to everything humanity had fought to control. Logan's orders were swift and decisive. Elise was to be sequestered, isolated from the Eliari and their influence. The risk was too great, and his mind worked furiously to calculate every possible outcome. He viewed the transformation as a contagion, spreading through her like a virus, corrupting her humanity and turning her into something else. Surveillance measures were put in place immediately, every movement of hers now under constant watch. He didn't care about the bond's potential for growth, for enlightenment, or the untapped knowledge it contained. To him, it was an unknown, an unpredictable force that had to be controlled. Elise was no longer a person in his eyes. She was a ticking time bomb. And if there was any chance to save humanity from whatever might emerge, he would tighten the net until nothing could escape. Logan stood in the sterile, dimly lit chamber, his mind spinning with a plan as dangerous as it was radical. The bond between Elise and Tyrellin had become more than a mere connection. It was a volatile force, one that threatened the very fabric of reality itself. He had spent days analyzing the neural data, every pulse, every frequency, and he had arrived at a conclusion as cold and calculated as his demeanor. The only solution was separation, Operation Severance, a neural surgery so advanced, so untested, that its success was a fleeting hope. Logan had no illusions about the risks. If it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Minds could unravel, consciousness could shatter, and worst of all, the delicate balance of space-time itself might collapse. But in Logan's eyes, the cost of failure was irrelevant compared to the potential danger Elise and Tyrellin posed. It was a choice between saving them or letting the cosmos burn. The Eliari elders spoke in a voice that trembled with ancient weight, their eyes clouded with the knowledge of countless millennia. The warning they issued was not just a caution, it was a desperate plea to preserve the fragile weave of reality itself. They had seen this before, or something close to it. The bond between Elise and Tyrellin was no mere psychic connection. It was the thread that held the fabric of existence together. To sever that link was to tear at the very essence of the world. The psychic currents that flowed between the two, intertwined with the cosmos, were delicate. If torn too hastily, too violently, the repercussions could be unimaginable. They spoke of worlds breaking apart, of time and space warping and shattering under the strain. The elders' faces reflected the dread of an impending apocalypse. Reality itself was not some unshakable constant. It was alive, pulsing with the lives it supported. Tear the soul, and the world might follow. The offer came with cold clarity, wrapped in the clinical precision of a scientist, but the weight of it was no less devastating. Shamari, Tyrellin's estranged sister, stood before Elise, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of determination and calculated detachment. A rogue xenobiologist, she had long ago abandoned the noble pursuits of her people, her obsession with the limits of biology having led her to make compromises others would deem unforgivable. Escape is possible, Shamari said, her voice smooth, almost dispassionate. I've studied your bond. There's a way to sever it without destroying your mind. You would be free, Elise. You would no longer be tethered to this alien connection. But the price was steep. In order for this to work, you must disable Tyrellin's psychic defenses. He will be vulnerable. Open to manipulation, Shamari continued, as if it were a simple equation. This is the only way to guarantee your freedom. The room seemed to close in on Elise as the full scope of the decision settled in her mind. To accept was to betray the very person she had come to care for, to risk Tyrellin's sanity for the sake of her own safety. But to refuse, was that to condemn herself to a life bound to something she could barely comprehend? It wasn't just a choice, it was a test of her very soul. Could she sacrifice one to preserve the other? Or would the unknown prove a more terrifying ally than the certainty of betrayal? The ground beneath their feet shuddered, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that spread like wildfire through the very bones of the outpost. The earth itself seemed to howl in anger, the walls of the structure groaning as if they too were struggling against the mounting force. But it wasn't just the earth that was in turmoil. The sky above them erupted with a violent flash of plasma, the air crackling with a fierce energy that surged like a living thing. Lightning split the heavens in jagged arcs, a violent reminder of the power at play. For a moment, Elise was paralyzed, overwhelmed by the terror of it all. Then her gaze found Tyrellin, standing beside her, his presence grounding her even in the heart of the chaos. Their connection, the bond they shared, was not just a psychic tether. It was something far more profound, more elemental than either had yet realized. Without speaking, they both breathed in synchrony. A shared pulse of energy coursed between them, the storm outside beginning to echo their united rhythm. The quaking slowed. The plasma storms above flickered as though caught in their energy. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the world outside calmed. The outpost, too, stabilized, its trembling walls falling silent. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. Unity was not a myth nor a mere concept, it was a force. A primal, unyielding force that could bend reality itself to its will. Elise stood before the mirror, her breath shallow as her reflection stared back at her, alien and unfamiliar. The eyes that met hers were not the same ones she had known her entire life. They were deeper, brighter, impossibly so, and they seemed to shimmer with an energy that wasn't entirely her own. The reflection blinked, and for a moment it felt as if the reflection was looking back into her, rather than her looking at it. It wasn't the first time she'd felt this disconnect, but now, the question that burned in her mind wasn't whether she should have kissed Tyrellin. That moment was nothing more than a flash of desire. A mistake, perhaps, but not this. This was something else. Something far more terrifying. She blinked again, and the alien eyes stared back at her with something that resembled understanding, like they knew the truth she was too afraid to admit. Am I still human? The question lingered, twisting in her chest, gnawing at her. She had felt the shift within herself, the change that was becoming too noticeable to ignore. Tyrellin's influence, his essence, had worked its way into her being. The line between human and alien had blurred, and now she wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. Was this evolution, a step forward into something greater? Or was it an error? A catastrophic mistake that would leave her stranded on the precipice of something she couldn't control? The twin moons of Nivera hovered in the sky once again, their pale glow casting an eerie shadow over the landscape. It was a sight that should not have been possible, an astronomical anomaly that defied all natural laws. Yet here they were, side by side, as if the universe itself had bent to a force beyond comprehension. Elise stood beneath them, a sense of dread curling in her stomach. The gravitational pull was already starting to warp the atmosphere, distorting the very fabric of reality. The bond she shared with Tyrellin had created ripples in the world around them, altering things in ways she couldn't fully understand, nor control. What had once felt like a simple connection now felt like a burden, a responsibility that threatened to crush her. This was the moment foretold. The final window. Time, as it always did, was running out. Elise's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at the twin moons. Their alignment was no mere coincidence. It was the signal, the call to action. Everything had led to this point, a convergence of forces that she could no longer deny. The choice before her was monumental. The cost of failure was too high. If the bond between her and Tyrellin fractured in this instant, the consequences could be catastrophic. And yet, as much as she feared it, she could feel the pull, the inevitability. The device lay before her, sleek and obsidian, its edges sharp and impossibly perfect. It hummed with quiet power, a living thing almost, as if it knew the weight it carried. Designed by the finest minds Earth had to offer, its purpose was clear: to sever the bond between Elise and Tyrellin. It was the final untested option, an unspoken promise of release or destruction, depending on how it was used. Elise's fingers hovered over the surface, the temptation of control pressing against her chest. The bond she had formed with Tyrellin was not just a connection. It was a merging of fates, of minds, of something beyond her understanding. But it had brought chaos too, rupturing the very fabric of reality, shaking the foundations of everything they had known. Tyrellin stood beside her, his form silent, yet his presence filled the space between them like an unspoken plea. His breath was shallow, labored, as if the very act of being near the device was a strain on him. He was a warrior, an alien, and yet in this moment he was vulnerable. He trusted her. But could he trust her to make the right choice? With a single press of the button, Elise could sever it all, the bond, the chaos, the connection. Or she could leave it intact and risk the unraveling of everything. The weight of humanity's final decision was hers alone to bear. Tyrellin's mind was fraying, a thin thread stretched too tight between worlds. The psychic bond that had once united him with Elise now felt like a rift, dark and pulsing with a threat of its own. His voice, once steady and confident, trembled with something deeper, something more fragile than she had ever imagined possible. It wasn't fear that shook him. It was resignation. "Elise," he began, the word barely a whisper, a tremor in the vast expanse of his thoughts. "If you cannot accept me, truly, wholly, then end it." There was no anger, no bitterness in his voice, only the raw, tender truth. He was not asking her to choose between him and the unknown. He was offering her an escape from a fate that could never be hers if she was not willing. "If this bond is a cage," he continued, his mental presence flickering, "I would rather vanish." The bond, the rift between them, was now her choice, and his final words, laced with acceptance, left a jagged wound in the silence. Elise's breath caught in her chest as she approached the fusion chamber. Its walls glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, an ancient relic of the Eliari, beings whose understanding of consciousness transcended the limits of physical form. The air around her thrummed with energy, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to seep into her very bones. She had been told of this place, a psychic crucible where minds didn't meet through words or gestures, but through the raw essence of being. This was not a place for the faint of heart. Every instinct in her screamed to turn back, to flee from the unknown and the unknowable. But the weight of what was at stake pushed her forward. The bond between her and Tyrellin had stretched to its breaking point, and in this chamber, in this place of unimaginable power, she would either find the way to sever it or lose herself entirely. As she stepped over the threshold, the light flared brighter, the room pulsating with an energy she couldn't comprehend. Her body seemed to shift, as if reality itself was bending to the will of forces far beyond human understanding. The psychic resonance enveloped her, and she could feel her mind brushing against the edge of something vast, something ancient. But if she hesitated even for a moment, she would become one with the light, lost, fragmented, never to return. Elise's pulse quickened as the bond deepened. It was no longer just a connection of thoughts, a fleeting moment of shared intention. Tyrellin's essence flowed into her, ancient, powerful, and painfully intimate. She could feel the weight of his centuries pressing against her mind, a thousand lifetimes of love and loss, joy and sorrow, each one bleeding through her like an unbroken current. The fragments of his past, companions who had loved him, cultures that had revered him, rippled in her consciousness. But it wasn't just his memories, it was his longing, the kind that transcended time and form. The bond between them was not born of biology, nor of the material world that governed their separate lives. It was something more, a force woven into the very fabric of existence, a shared story, told not in spoken words but in choices. It was belief, it was trust, it was a decision made by two beings caught in the web of fate. The truth was clear now. This was no mere psychic connection, it was the essence of the Eliari, a race that had long since abandoned the boundaries of the physical for the limitless expanse of the mind. They had chosen to be one, not out of necessity, but because they believed in it. And Elise now understood. Their bond, their love, was not written in their genetics or their biology. It was written in time itself. Elise's mind trembled under the weight of the bond. She had always believed herself immune to vulnerability, locked within her own fortress of solitude. But now, exposed to the deepest parts of her soul, the past rose in stark, unforgiving clarity. Scars burned brightly before her, burned cities, charred memories of lost comrades, the anguished faces of those she had failed. Each loss was a wound that had festered in silence, untouched and unhealed. The bond wasn't chains, it wasn't a prison that confined her. No, it was a mirror, reflecting her own fears, her self-imposed isolation. It stripped her of the walls she had built, forcing her to confront what she had buried beneath the surface. The bond pushed her to feel again, to connect with the lives and emotions that had been severed from her heart long ago. And with that exposure came the most terrifying realization. She could no longer run from the truth. She had never truly trusted anyone, not even herself. Elise's hands shook, every tremor a reflection of the weight she carried. Before her, the severance device hummed, a sleek, obsidian relic of an alien civilization. To her left, Tyrellin's presence pulsed in the back of her mind, a distant ache that tugged at the very fibers of her being. The choice had been clear yet infinitely complex. Break the bond or rewrite it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she leaned over the console, the quiet sound of her breath filling the space between desperation and determination. The code in front, of her was alien, incomprehensible. But her human mind, resilient and ever adaptable, had already begun to unravel its intricacies. With a final shaky breath, Elise's fingers moved across the interface, reprogramming the severance device not to tear the connection, but to expand it. She input a new protocol, one born from human ingenuity, a psychic stabilization through voluntary empathy, a bridge between two souls, forged by the hands of a species who had never before known the true depths of their own connections. This was not just a technological fix, it was a human rewrite of an ancient Eliari myth, a rewriting of the very idea of what it meant to connect, to feel, to trust. As the final sequence completed, Elise held her breath. The universe held its Elise's pulse quickened as she activated the modified device. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of what she was about to do settling in. The device, now humming with a strange alien energy, resonated with the force of her intention, an intention to connect, to bridge the gap between humanity and the ancient Eliari. As her fingers pressed the final sequence, the ground beneath her stirred. At first it was a subtle vibration, a mere tremor that barely registered, but then the resonance deepened like the very heart of the planet was awakening. Beneath the fusion chamber, hidden in the depths of forgotten stone and metal, something stirred. An ancient psychic node that had lain dormant for eons, waiting for this moment. Crystalline roots, interwoven like the veins of a great cosmic being, began to pulse with an eerie light, bathing the chamber in a glow that was neither warm nor cold, but electric with the pulse of forgotten power. The Eliari had not been mere spiritual seekers. They had been the guardians of something far greater. They had been custodians of a galactic mindway, a psychic network that spanned the stars, weaving together the thoughts and souls of countless beings. Now it was awakening. The artifact pulsed once, a quiet tremor that reverberated through the chamber, and then, with a sudden intensity that sent a shockwave across the base, it exploded outward in brilliant light. Waves of energy surged, cascading through the air, and with it, the very fabric of space seemed to warp. Elise's heart skipped a beat as the light stretched out beyond the confines of the chamber, reaching across the expanse of the base, across vast distances, and into the unknown reaches of space. In an instant, the light transformed into something, more a bridge not of physical matter but of thought. Across the stars, across alien minds, pairs of consciousnesses began to connect. The minds were not linked by the cold, mechanical structure of a hive, but by something far deeper, empathy. Two beings, once distant and unknowable, now shared a fleeting, intimate understanding. Eliari minds, ancient and infinite, flickered with the spark of human connection. Not every mind connected. Some hesitated, too entrenched in their isolation. But for those who did, the moment was profound. The realization was shared, instantaneous. Not a force, not a compulsion, but a mutual choice. A chosen empathy, something that transcended the boundaries of species, of time, of mind. It was the beginning of something new. An age where humanity could bridge the stars, not through technology or war, but through the power of shared understanding. Elise stood with Tyrellin, their hands intertwined, the steady pulse of the artifact still echoing in the air around them. They were not merely bound by the device, nor by the strange psychic threads that connected them. They were conduits, vessels for something far greater than the sum of their parts. Together, they had crossed the threshold, not into a world of domination, but into one of communion. The others, those once distant and divided, now stirred in the periphery, their own minds flickering to life. The barriers of isolation that had once defined them, whether alien or human, began to crack and crumble. Each connection was not forged through force, but through choice, a decision to reach out, to understand, to share. Humanity's next step was not one of conquest. It was a step of connection, of bridging the gap between not just species but consciousness itself. They would not carve out their place in the stars through war or subjugation. Instead, they would do so through love, through empathy, through fire. They would carry forward a new world, a world bound not by the desire to dominate but by the choice to connect. The fire that had sparked in their hearts would spread across the cosmos. And in that light, they were all equal. The research station, long abandoned and forgotten, now thrummed with life. The sterile metallic halls that had once echoed only with the sound of data streams and mechanical whirs were filled with the soft hum of conversation, of minds connecting. Humans and Eliari moved through the corridors together, their steps synchronized, their eyes bright with the shared knowledge that they were no longer separate, In pairs, their minds were linked in carefully regulated bonds, not yet seamless but a beginning, a spark of something more. They were test subjects and ambassadors alike, carrying the weight of an entire new era on their shoulders. Elise and Terellen stood at the heart of it all, their bond a symbol of what was to come. They were not just a diplomatic partnership, they were the living embodiment of the first true experiment in soulbound diplomacy. Their connection, forged through shared thought and emotion, represented the potential to bridge the vast chasm between their species. This was not just a research station reborn, it was a bridge between worlds, and they were the first to cross it. The psychic artifact, buried deep within the alien structure, pulsed with ancient energy. Once dormant, it now hummed to life, a powerful resonance that reverberated through the minds of those bound to it. Humans and Eliari, linked in carefully regulated pairs, felt it first as a tremor, a quiet whisper at the edges of their thoughts. Then, like a sudden storm, the floodgates opened. Information, vast and incomprehensible, poured through them. It was the collective knowledge of lost civilizations, the secrets of galactic history, the unfathomable laws of physics, everything that had been forgotten, buried, waiting. The artifact, sentient in its own right, spoke in ways no one had predicted. But it was not an omniscient god, it was something far more dangerous. It only answered questions that came from the heart. Only those who asked with truth, with vulnerability, received its knowledge. The questions began to change, as the seekers learned that knowledge was not simply an answer, it was a reckoning. Elise stood at the edge of the precipice, the weight of the bond pulling her in every direction. No longer did she see it as a curse, nor the whispered remnants of a romance. The bond had transformed her, reshaped her understanding of herself. It was evolution, not just the survival of the fittest, but the survival of the most connected. Radical empathy, something beyond mere understanding, had taken root in her soul. As the feelings of others swirled around her, she mourned the detached observer she used to be. But that person no longer existed. She had stepped fully into the unknown. Trellen stood before the assembly, a figure who had transcended his origins. Once a quiet scholar, now a cultural beacon, he radiated something more than knowledge. He carried the fire of transformation. The elders of his people were divided. Some resisted the change, clinging to traditions as the foundation of their identity, fearing the shift humanity brought with them. But others, their eyes wide with wonder, knelt in reverence. Trellen's words cut through the tension, echoing in the hearts of those who listened. He spoke of choice, not prophecy. He spoke of humanity, not as chaos, but as catalyst. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of reaction on Earth. The bond, the fusion of human and alien minds, fractured the fragile consensus that had held humanity together. Across the globe, some leaders hailed it as the next evolution of sentient unity, a bridge between species, a bond that could propel humanity to untold heights. But there were others who screamed of alien mind control, their voices raw with fear and suspicion. They painted the bond as a dangerous tool of domination, a violation of human autonomy. Protests erupted in the streets, a cacophony of anger and confusion. The air crackled with tension as factions clashed, each side digging in their heels. Recruitment for volunteer bindings skyrocketed, driven by a mixture of curiosity, hope, and desperation. But with it came an undercurrent of dread, fear that humanity might be sacrificing its very soul to the unknown. Elise had always believed in the power of self-control, the ability to mask her true emotions and thoughts from the world. A carefully constructed persona was her shield, her armor against the chaos of life. But now, with the bond, that illusion had shattered. The mind link with Terellen had unraveled something deeper, something raw and undeniable. She could no longer lie, not to him, not to anyone. The truth surged through her, a relentless tide that could not be stopped. Her mind fought against the transparency, a final desperate act of defiance. But it was futile. The bond had exposed her. The weight of her own soul crushed her, for the first time in her life completely visible. Every secret, every guarded thought, every lie she had told herself was laid bare. And in that exposure, Elise wept, not for her loss of privacy, but for the masks she had worn, the falsehoods that had once given her a sense of control over a world she could no longer deceive. Elise stood at the edge of the outpost, the wind biting at her skin, her senses alive with a kind of awareness that was new, almost alien. The ship approached on the horizon, its sleek form cutting through the sky. But it wasn't the ship that caught her attention, it was the presence aboard it, She could feel them before she saw them. The delegates. Humanity had always sought contact with the unknown, reaching out into the void with hope and ambition. But this wasn't first contact, it was first connection. Not through technology, not through force, but through something deeper, more intimate. A bond forged not by strength, but by raw, honest truth. Humanity was no longer just exploring. It was becoming part of something larger, more honest, more vulnerable. And in that moment, Elise understood the terrifying beauty of what had been birthed in the fire of their shared evolution. Years had passed since the first humbling encounter, but the journey they now embarked on felt far more perilous. Elise and Tyrellin led a crew of the most daring and brilliant minds to the edge of a dying sun, where a forgotten relic of a shattered world drifted in the blackness. The alien megastructure loomed like a testament to an ancient species' failure, a ring world, broken, abandoned, its once mighty purpose now just a whisper of history. The echoes of their attempts to unify through shared consciousness lingered, etched in the stones in the silent warnings left behind. They had tried to bind themselves together, to achieve the impossible. They had failed, and now it was humanity's turn to face the very same peril. Would they rise above the mistakes of others, or would they succumb to the same fate? The questions gnawed at Elise's mind as the ship drew closer to the ring world's shattered remains, and she knew that some answers could never be unlearned. Inside the heart of the shattered ring world, a presence lingered, more ancient than any human mind could fully comprehend. The core pulsed with psychic remnants, a haunting hum that resonated deep within Elise's mind, like the faintest echo of a long-dead dream. It was a failed attempt at unity, a fusion of minds that once sought to transcend individuality. Now, it lay in ruins. Skeletal cities sprawled beneath her gaze, their structures frozen in time as if the very fabric of existence had paused to mourn. The neural fields, once vibrant with the flow of thought, now lay dormant, frozen in the same agonizing stillness. Elise did not see tragedy here, though. She saw a lesson, an eternal warning etched into the very bones of the ring world. A lesson, carved in time. Unity could be both the salvation and the death of a species, and humanity would not fall for the same fatal mistake. A dormant shard of the universal network, hidden for eons, began to stir, its once quiet hum now a silent tremor in the depths of the forgotten ring world. In the void between thought and memory, it activated, a presence not of machines but of something older, something wiser. It communicated without sound, without light, just pure thought, a mental pulse that reverberated deep within Elise's mind. One phrase echoed in the vast emptiness: shared minds either become gods or ghosts. It was not a technical warning, not a calculated algorithm. It was a plea, an emotional cry from the past, desperate for understanding. A chilling realization settled in. Those who sought unity of thought had failed to foresee the cost. The mind, when merged with others, could either ascend to divine understanding or dissolve into oblivion. Humanity's future now hung on a razor's edge. Elise stood on the precipice of history, a single breath away from becoming something far greater than she had ever imagined. She was no longer just a scientist, no longer just soul-bound to an ancient and alien truth. She had transcended those limits, becoming the seed of a new path. This path, she realized, was not one of power, domination, or conquest. It was a path built on empathy, understanding, and shared experience. Tyrellin stood beside her, the silent witness to her transformation. His presence was both a weight and a steadying force, his gaze deep with the understanding of what was at stake. This was not just a new era, it was the future of all sentient life, shaped by the choices of one human woman. As the stars blinked in the vast expanse of the sky, their light flickering like ancient memories across an unfeeling universe, silence enveloped them both. Time seemed to stretch, pulling at the edges of thought, and in that stillness Elise's words cut through the air like a vow. "If we're the first, I better not be the last who get it right," she whispered, her voice a quiet but fierce promise. The cosmos, an unyielding sea of distant suns and galaxies, seemed to listen. The weight of her declaration hung between them, echoing with the burden of hope and the terror of failure.